We're going to talk to Geoffrey Miller. And in fact, let's rip into welcome to the show, Geoffrey Miller. Good evening, sir.
Good evening, Pat. Hi there, Chewy. Good to be back with you.
Jeff.
Yeah, you too, man.
I was just
Geopolitical
thinking, you're
analyst.
kind of like New Zealand's last surviving late night news program in a way. Now that TV1 and TV3 don't have late bulletins, like you're it. So you've got a big responsibility there.
Yeah, and we're getting all of their leftover funding, which is this much. It's a big donut left over. We are going to talk about this later on, though, Geoffrey. There was some noises made today by this government kind of starting to say, hey, you know that thing that you guys in Labor talked about when it came to Facebook and Google, and we said that was Big Brother and we're not going to do it. Yeah, we think that's a good idea now, so we're going to do exactly what we said you guys shouldn't do. Labor, will you come on board? Because ACT doesn't want a bar of it. So, yes, we will talk about that a bit later in the show, in fact. Look, Geoffrey, thanks so much for joining us. There was a very interesting article written by or spoken to PMN. Remind me what the acronym's for? PMN?
Pacific Media Network. So I'm not sure exactly who owns it and how it comes about, but they have a live breakfast program that they relaunched, I believe, in May with a lot of live interviews. So I went on there on Monday morning to talk about the debate and the US elections and the French elections and their impact. So it was a really interesting chat there for about 20 minutes with the host. So it was a really interesting chat. And then they put this article together, which is always useful for those of us who don't want to sit through and listen to a 20-minute interview.
Yeah, if we were more professional, we'd do that kind of thing as well, Geoffrey, but we're not. So we just make people sit through our bullshit, don't we, Chewy? That's about it. Now, let's talk about this, because one of the things you talked about in that article, and we want to get to as well, is this idea about what's happening in France at the minute. And I guess you could also say in the UK at the end of this week. The UK seems almost guaranteed to go left because of 14 years of austerity, whatever it is now, super austerity. So almost sure to go left. But it seems that in France they're going pretty hard right. Certainly the first round of voting would suggest that's in the lead at the moment. In America, after that debate, there are many saying it's sort of, well, there are many, I don't want to exaggerate. There are some saying that Biden doesn't have a chance. If that was the case, that would go kind of pretty hard right. And we'd like to know in general what you think that means, what that tells us, but also what does it mean for us? Like in New Zealand, we're always, when people land on the plane, we always go, oh, what do you think of New Zealand? It's the first thing we ever ask anyone. It's a bit like that in one of those, how's it going to impact us, Geoffrey? That's what we really want to know. Sir.
Look, I think the centre is collapsing all around us. And in New Zealand, we had our election last year, and you saw that happen. You saw the smaller parties do pretty well. You saw a lukewarm vote really for national. It wasn't the big sweeping victories of old. And when you look at France, you see the National Rally doubling its vote, 34% in those first round of elections on Sunday. It was 18% 2 years ago. Even in the UK, like you're talking about Labour going to do really well, and they probably will have a landslide, right, towards Labour. But it's being supercharged by vote splitting because they have first past the post, and you have Nigel Farage's Reform UK party there on the right. That's splitting the right vote.
Yeah.
So it's not showing up. They probably won't win many, if any, seats, Reform. Maybe they get a couple if they're lucky. But Labour will do very well out of it, but it's more, it's more coincidental in a sense. I don't think there's
it's a byproduct,
huge enthusiasm for Labour, right? In the United Kingdom, there's some enthusiasm because there has been 14 years of Tory rule. And if you're only, in a two-party system, your only option is the other party. So voters kind of have to get enthused about Labour because what's the serious alternative? Even if they are not of, that persuasion, they might vote Labour just to get rid of Tory. So then you look at the United States, and of course, it's Trump once again, 8 years on from 2016. And it really should be an easy win for Joe Biden this year. If you look at the stock market, it's at record highs and economic growth, but yet it's inflation and the cost of living, and people do not feel wealthier in the slightest. We've seen these cost of living pressures here in New Zealand, and how everyone's very grumpy at the moment, to put it quite simply. Everyone feels very battered. We got through the pandemic, but things didn't get any better really after the pandemic. Things got harder, if anything, with rampant inflation. And it's been like that all around the world. And one of the responses that a lot of voters have had is to just vote out of frustration for the fringes, because they want their leaders to take notice and to make life better for them, and that's just not happening. So the centre is failing. Macron is failing in France, Emmanuel Macron, in Britain, in the United States, in New Zealand. And I think that's the real common thread here. Populism is back with a vengeance. It was a big topic, going back to 2015, 2016 with Brexit and with the Trump victory, but it's never gone away. And it's only got worse in a sense or it's become stronger because of the pandemic, because of inflation, these cost of living pressures. And I think in the end, you've got to address the root causes here. And there's no use sort of saying, Trump's evil, or, you shouldn't be voting for the far right in France. I mean, the other parties, they're looking to gang up on the far right and say, we won't work with you. And okay, yes, in the short term, maybe that's some kind of answer. But I think in the longer term, you need to provide those voters with a positive solution, and you want them to vote for you, and not just against, against the populists. So, there are lots of questions in my mind about all of these things, but I think they are all connected in the end.
The interesting thing about going to the fringes as well is it seems that some that go to the fringes because they're like just sick of everybody else, or they are voting against the other, often come back with a fair bit of regret. I mean, Brexit is the perfect example. I laughed because I was writing Brexit as you said Brexit, because the newspapers the day after were saying, regret and remorse. And everyone was like, we didn't think this would pass. This was just a vote to go, stuff the establishment sort of thing. And I think you're even seeing that in New Zealand a little bit as well, that, there's that old adage that people voted for National and the right because they wanted their house prices to go up by 10%. But what they're getting is a whole new line of legislation that they weren't voting for. And you can probably see that in the unfavourability in the ratings when it comes to Luxon as an individual, historically low, like personality polls, whatever the correct poll is, performance polls, compared to a first-time Prime Minister 6 months in. And I wonder if that's a lesson for us, that when we get really pissy and we go, fuck you all, I'm going to vote for these little guys, it won't do anything, but we'll just do that. All of a sudden they get in and we're like, what have we done? And I mean, I guess America, it's not just a little fringe guy, but it's Trump. And after that debate on Friday, to be really honest, there is some good arguments coming out about Biden, but we understand how optics works, and we understand that it's it would appear today, might be different in 3 months, today to be a pretty tough road for Biden to win that one. Although in saying that, well, my fourth point before I shut up is that it normally comes down to like 100,000 votes in 7 counties deciding who's president. So, I guess I was just coming back to that point that when we vote for the fringes, often people who do that as a protest end up regretting it.
Yes, I think that's very true. I think that's been the case, and I don't think we should be under any illusion that Trump's going to do anything for working people either. And I think a lot of the voters know that. They know that Trump is only out for himself, I think, as Barack Obama said. But that's not going to stop them voting for him anyway. They're so frustrated at the cost of living never being higher, about the lack of opportunities in the workplace. I mean, I think one of the big trends we're going to see now going forward is AI destroying a lot of white collar jobs. You think of stock photographers, for example. There was a Reddit posting, you mentioned Reddit earlier, I noticed yesterday on the New Zealand subreddit, with a magazine, tradie magazine, and it had the group of workers there in high vis vests, and there was a big discussion about this was AI generated, and you could go down the rabbit hole reading all the answers, that sort of show that it's an AI picture. But you just think, look at that, that's incredible. 10 years ago or 5 years ago, it would be unthinkable. You would have a stock photograph that someone would have been paid for a photographer. That was a good job, right? And it's now gone. Why would you pay for stock photos now when you can generate it using AI? And if you think back to 2016 with the whole when Trump was here for the first time around, often what was talked about was the car factories and the middle class jobs being destroyed in the Midwest that were gone. You had these good paying middle class jobs in factories in the 60s, 70s that were no longer there, and that's why they turned to vote Trump. Well, I think from now on, you're going to see increasingly it's the white collar jobs that get destroyed, and increasingly through AI. So populism is not going away, and until you get some of these big solutions, universal basic income, for example, taxing, finding a way to tax these big tech companies where, as a society, we've never been richer, but the wealth is so concentrated. In the end, that goes back to, the whole theory of the 1%, and, some of the things that Occupy were raising during the financial crisis. Well, it's only got, a lot more concentrated. You've got all those statistics about wealth being concentrated in, a small number of individuals and companies. That wealth concentration is far greater now than it was during the global financial crisis. So in the end, the centrists, they're going to have to find some solutions to this. And you're going to talk later about the media stories, I know. And, this is tinkering around the edges, in my view. I think you need to do full-scale regulation of big tech, really, if you're going to make any difference, because there is a huge amount of money that's being made by these companies that in the past would have been distributed around society. Now it's concentrated in just a few big tech companies. And we need to find an answer for this, because it is fueling a lot of resentment in the end, and it is fueling populism. So, it goes back to, some of these things that Bernie Sanders was talking about way back when, and his answer was free college. And I think there are arguments in favor of that, because if these, the only answer is to upskill, we're going to have to address some of these things.
Yeah. One other thing just to add to that, because you've said AI, I think it's not just AI though, it's also AI and automation. And then And then when you join AI to the automation, like I'm looking at some video coming through recently of what's happening in Amazon warehouses at the moment, being people-less. And that's because of the automation as well. That's sort of a part of it. But
absolutely. I mean, it's been a development, right? You've gone from automation to now AI, and it's incredible. I just think we're just not aware of the rate of change here. And while it's interesting to talk about, Joe Biden stuffing up on the debate, and I think it's important, right? His personal qualities are a big factor as well.
Yeah.
But I think, it should, if Joe Biden really were promising the kinds of changes that would make life better for ordinary people, it would be a much easier sell, wouldn't it? He would have something really very saleable that would get voters excited. Voters are not excited about Joe Biden. They're not really excited about Donald Trump. They're simply voting for Trump out of frustration, and you'll probably have a low voter turnout in the elections in November, would be my guess.
Shall we jump in, friend?
Lots of interesting stuff there. I think the protest vote we've always had here in New Zealand, a lot of people would vote for Winston Peters because he calls it as it is, and he says what we're all thinking and that sort of thing. And I don't think anyone really expects him to do well, but then he ends up holding the balance of power every time. I think what Pat said about Brexit was really true. No one expected that to pass, but there were that many people dissatisfied with the party pushing it, or pushing against it, I should say, that they voted against it, or they voted for it. And
careful what you ask for, you might get it.
Yeah, exactly. And I've spent most of today talking about the dangers of AI with my workmates, and just because I saw that tradie magazine. One of my workmates showed a presentation that a friend of his had made using AI, and I was like, "Well, I can tell it's AI, but a lot of people wouldn't spot this as being a non-human presenter." And the more that someone's voice is available, the closer the voice match gets. So you can mock up a Biden deepfake, you can mock up a Trump deepfake, you can get them to say whatever they want, and it'll do the rounds. And it'll do damage before anybody gets you go, that's fake. And people go, I don't care. It's what I believe in anyway.
Yeah.
And through all of this, I'm reminded of the Black Mirror. They had an episode called The Waldo Moment, where an animated blue bear runs for British Parliament and does really well because people are pissed off with the establishment. And I think that's a case of the establishment politician. You know, you get people go, politicians are all the same, left or right, it doesn't matter. They're not engaged. They don't think that any of these guys are going to do anything for them. So I'm going to vote for whatever fringe thing I think might happen. And it might be that I hate immigrants. It might be that I hate trans people. It might be this, that, or the other thing, but it becomes a one issue voting. And that's why we see this rise in populism, where you have, you know, the French, huge anti-immigration push. Same in Germany, same in Italy, because of that wave of immigration they've had from the conflict in Syria. And people don't feel listened to, and they lash out. And I think it's often, it's not the consequence that they were after. They're going to get a whole lot more. And I think we've seen the same in the States. It's human nature. The whole world has gone through a really tough thing. Lots of people have died. Lots of people's jobs have gone. I want something to happen, rattle the cage.
Yeah. I was just going to say, when you look at the National Rally in France, they have evolved to a degree, and they've been quite savvy in the last couple of years, focusing on cost of living, focusing on inflation, focusing on rolling back VAT on basic, you know, goods, on energy, for example. They've been quite clever in downplaying some of their more racist elements that they had in the past. Some of that is still there. You know, in the end, the party still has a heritage, and Marine Le Pen is, you know, still the daughter of the founder, who, you know, was much more open with his views, and was also more of a fringe movement as a result. But you know, the National Rally, Marine Le Pen's party, its success has very much been driven by the high inflation that we've seen over the last 2-3 years since the pandemic. And it's ridden the wave of inflation to its success here. So I think there's a lesson there for the mainstream, for Emmanuel Macron. You know, the voters don't want these pension reforms, these right-wing pension reforms. They don't want, you know, they have to face these constant inflation. They feel like going backwards. They feel like their wages are being eroded by inflation. And so the lesson has to be find some solutions to these big problems that ordinary working people are facing. I think in the end, that's what you've got to do. You've got to look at the root causes of the discontent, find better solutions, offer them to the voters, and implement them. If you do all of that, you'll be winning huge majorities of the vote. And I don't see that, though, at the moment. What I see is the centre, the mainstream, the establishment, just trying to find tactical ways to disqualify the far right. So that's what they're doing in France. They're trying to blockade it. In Germany, you know, there's always talk about banning the AfD party, the Alternative for Germany party. I think these are silly solutions. You can't ban the ideas in the end, and they will just keep cropping up in new parties when you try these kind of tactics, or it will just fuel support for them in all likelihood. You know, you'll make them into martyrs.
Let's move on to the news that broke today. This is a couple of minutes. We'll watch this together and then talk about the decision that SCOTUS made today to do with immunity and the President of the United States of America.
The events of the January 6th insurrection,
USA! USA!
the former US president's role in it, and whether he illegally conspired to overturn his election defeat.
We fight like hell.
Was expected to soon be dealt with in a courtroom. But in a historic ruling, the US Supreme Court has granted former presidents immunity from prosecution, but not in all cases, something Donald Trump has called for himself.
Presidential immunity is imperative, or you practically won't have a country anymore.
In the decision, Chief Justice John Roberts wrote that the president must have some immunity to be able to execute the duties of his office fearlessly and fairly. Without immunity, such types of prosecutions of ex-presidents could quickly become routine. The Supreme Court rejected Trump's claims that he should be completely immune for his actions around January 6th, but decided that any official acts as president should be protected from prosecution. The Supreme Court was divided. Liberal Justice Sonia Sotomayor calling the decision deeply wrong with disastrous consequences, writing, "The president is now a king above the law. With fear for our democracy, I dissent."
Today's decision almost certainly means that there are virtually no limits on what a president can do.
Justice Sotomayor also gave hypotheticals, saying orders the Navy's SEAL Team 6 to assassinate a political rival, immune. Organises a military coup to hold on to power, immune.
The American people must decide if they want to entrust the president once again, the presidency, to Donald Trump, now knowing he'll be even more emboldened to do whatever he pleases whenever he wants to do it.
The government lawyer taking Trump to court over January 6th now has to decide what are unofficial acts that can still be prosecuted.
That means the chances of a trial before the election are zero at this point.
But Trump will be back in a New York courtroom next week regardless, when he's due to be sentenced for his hush money case. Alice Wilkins.
So there you go, guys. Now, just to spell it out, I mean, we don't need to spell it out, but basically what they're saying is the president needs to be able to commit crimes if he was in his official capacity and not be held accountable for them legally. That's because what do you need immunity from? You need immunity from illegal actions. That's where we're at. Of course, the debate is now going to shift into what is and what isn't an official act. But Geoffrey, this is just today's news. Love to get your take on it.
Yeah, it is really interesting, isn't it? And it's going to be fought out through the courts. I guess the immediate implication is that it's not going to be resolved in time for the election. So these court cases will drag on. And if Trump can win the election, in all likelihood, he's won in a sense. So that's, I guess, one big implication straight away. It's going to delay and drag everything out further. Beyond that, I mean, a couple of points. Polarization is visible here. This is what I've been really talking about throughout this chat, this polarization we're seeing in politics all around the world, and the rise of populists and the extremes. And you're seeing in the Supreme Court, I don't think this is healthy, where you've got this polarization, the 3 liberal judges all dissent, the 6 conservative judges pass it. So, in a sense, it almost becomes like a replica of a parliament almost. And I don't think that's healthy. In the end, you want a Supreme Court and you want judges who are independently minded, and that's not what you've got now in the US.
Yeah.
But I think, look, I think it's a really interesting question. I can see both sides if I'm honest with all of this. I mean, you think of presidents up till this point have had a sense of sort of de facto immunity, because if you look at George Bush with the Iraq War or Barack Obama with drone strikes, they've not been prosecuted. And so Trump is the first one where you've really got a prosecution. Up till now, the kind of almost has been a de facto immunity from prosecution, not in all cases. I mean, you can go back to Nixon and impeachment and that kind of thing. But, there has been some level of protection, I guess, for presidents. So it's now, now it's going to be resolved through the courts. I mean, of course, those examples that Sonia Sotomayor raised are outrageous, aren't they? What a president could do with immunity. But it is, it's going to be debated through the courts, and no doubt there's going to be all kinds of hearings and appeals. And this definition of official versus non-official acts is going to be pretty crucial.
It's a sad way to look at it, but it's almost like the Americans want to hold their presidents accountable for crimes they commit against Americans, whether it's Nixon or whether it's Trump. And for those kind of foreign people, when we commit crimes against them, it's fine. Don't have to hold our president accountable for those, do we? Chewy, what do you got to say about it, mate? Any thoughts?
Well, I mean, there is an example that springs to mind. Obama ordered a drone strike on a US citizen.
That's true.
So
Yeah,
I
exactly.
mean, there's an extrajudicial killing on a US citizen, admittedly overseas.
But I mean, you
that
can,
would be
yeah.
something.
I mean, you can see, look, with the prosecution of Trump happening, that this, you can see this being repeated in the future against other presidents, and then where does that lead to? Do presidents then essentially do nothing when they're in office because they're afraid of being prosecuted? I guess that's the Trump argument. The other side is exactly as Biden said, no one should be above the law. I mean, I would agree with that as well. I mean, I don't think you want your presidents to have immunity for, or just doing anything, because it would lead to, in itself, outrageous consequences. And in Donald Trump's case, of course, this is all about January the 6th, and you shouldn't have immunity for whatever you do in those situations. You should be accountable for your actions. So I think it's a hard one, and it's going to end up in the courts. Really, it's a political question, I guess, where you stand with a lot of these things, but it will end up being resolved in one way or the other, probably through the courts, but maybe politically as well, because if Donald Trump wins in November, maybe these legal processes end up getting essentially stayed. So
they go away.
We will have to see. But there's a political element, of course, to this. It can't probably remain just a legal judicial matter.
I mean, I can see what they're trying to avoid. It's kind of like, I guess, the failed state model of, like, as soon as you get voted out, the incoming leader throws you in jail, sort of thing.
Yeah, exactly.
But that is some real sort of South America junta type behavior that I don't think anybody really expects of America, but still. And I think Trump is weaponizing this because he knows he's as shady as fuck, and it's all of his business dealings and backhandedness and leaking of classified material and that sort of thing, which I think through any metric should be actionable under the Justice Department. It's if he's going to have the catch-all of, like, oh, it's an official act because I was officially the president, so therefore everything's an official act, is just bananas.
Yeah,
it is. It's going to be a strange one.
It's complex, and we this is going to go on, this debate. And maybe this is a good thing. Maybe we should have this debate on this issue. It hasn't happened before in the same way. You haven't had presidents being prosecuted through the courts for what they did when they were in office. Maybe that should have happened sooner. So
one of the responses we could go with, well, maybe there should be some consequences for a war criminal in Bush. Maybe there should be some consequences for, they're talking about the ICC having a crack at Netanyahu. Why not Bush? Why not Obama if they've committed international crimes or war crimes?
Exactly. And, it would be really interesting. And of course, it would have a significant deterrent power. If that were the case, if you had to think, well, what if I do this? If I launch this drone strike, could I be prosecuted through the courts? Perhaps I better not, launch that drone strike. But wouldn't that be a good thing? I mean, I think it's worth thinking about all of these issues, but there are always unintended consequences, aren't there? So we also have to be mindful of those.
And it'll be something we continue to talk about, Geoffrey. Look, hey, thank you so much for joining us today. If people want to find out more about you, the good thing about your website, geoffreymiller.info, is it's got all your links there, Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn and a YouTube channel. It's all just there for people to find out more about you. What's the highlight of the place they should find you? Like, if they're going to go to one place to find out more about you, Geoffrey?
I said to you before the show, I probably haven't updated the website for a couple of months, but I try and keep my social media a bit more updated with my interviews and articles and so forth. So click on to X, or still shows the Twitter logo, but it's X, of course, these days, where I'm quite judicious what I post these days. So I just tend to put what I publish or where I'm interviewed. So if you want my latest content, that's a good place to go. The YouTube channel, I also try and put up the interviews that I do on radio and TV, and the one I did on the Pacific Media Network is there. So if you want to see those or listen to those, then check out the YouTube channel. But thanks for having me on.
Geopolitical analyst and fellow Dunedinite. How about that?
Indeed.
You weren't even aware. Geoffrey Miller joins us tonight. Thanks, Jeff. We appreciate your time, man. We'll catch you around town.
Hey, thanks, Pat. Thanks, Chewy.